Today we're joined by Lynette Thorstensen, Chair of Fairtrade International. Lynette is joining us from London at the World Trade Symposium as part of this interview with Trade Finance Talks. Thank you very much for joining us. Could we have a quick introduction? So who are you, where are you from, and what do you do?
Great. Well, I'm the elected chair of Fairtrade International, and it really is a privilege to lead this global movement. We're a global trade justice movement. We're well known for certifying and for setting high standards for the products that are traded. But really, I think we're much more than that. We're a movement, and we are interested in educating our nearly 2 million small farmers that we work with, largely in Africa, Latin America, and the Asia Pacific. But we're also very proud to say that we are the world's most recognized sustainability label, and this is probably even more important, the most trusted. And we've done plenty of third-party surveys to let us know that. And we've just discovered from a recent survey that we are the most trusted label to work with producers themselves. They like the nature of the relationship they have with us. And the main reason for that is a simple one, and that is that through our work, Fairtrade insists on a minimum price for products for our small producers and workers, and that is absolutely fundamental to the notion of decent livelihoods for our members, for our small producers.
So Lynette, just touching on your really excellent panel session this morning, you mentioned that 460 million children went into a learning crisis due to that digital divide during COVID. Can you talk a bit more about that, and what were your top remarks from the session this morning?
Absolutely. So the question was, did the digital divide get better or worse during COVID? And in fact, for a very significant part of the population, it got worse. So UNICEF did an important study on this and identified that about 463 million children went into what they call learning crisis. So that meant, because they couldn't go to school, everyone was at home, locked at home because of COVID, they didn't have access to computers or internet or even mobile phones to be able to access any kind of e-learning, something that we all grumbled about in developed countries, but took for granted in most cases. Although even in the north there were families that didn't have 3 computers where they had 3 children. Mm-hmm. This has huge significance in all sorts of ways. In terms of the question of digital literacy and the nature of the workforce moving forward to be able to access digital supply chains, work on digital trade and so on, it's an absolutely major issue. Where is the future educated, skilled up workforce coming from if we're coming off the back of learning crisis? So that, I think, has to be seen as a fundamental issue from which we're moving forward, and absolutely take it into consideration. It's true that the world's 10 richest men, including the leaders of the GAFAs, became infinitely wealthier during COVID, but it's not true for a vast sector of the population.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, let's talk about trade, because trade is often held accountable for non-sustainable practices and lack of transparency in supply chains. Often, I think we forget about the S in ESG, society and social governance there. How can Fairtrade International help?
Well, I think the S in our case is all about decent livelihoods, the human right to decent work. And so we have millions of small farmers wanting to be small businessmen, to earn decent livelihoods. And how do we go about that? Through trade mechanisms. So most of our small producers export to Europe and the US and Canada. The single most important mechanism is the recognition of a minimum price for their products, a price that allows them to live above the poverty line. And you raised the example earlier of the chocolate bar. So our cocoa farmers in West Africa, all too many of them are earning less than $1 a day. So if you buy a £2 chocolate bar in England or a couple of euros in Europe, only about 5% of that purchase price goes back to the producer. to the farmer who's picked the cocoa, grown the cocoa. And we consider that to be outrageously unfair, which is why we believe that not only our processes, so fair trade products, any fair trade product you buy will ensure a minimum price back to the farmer, but we think governments and partnerships with business have to take this notion far wider. We work with about 2 million small farmers. That's a good start, but we know there are 500 million small farmers in the world, and they're all in similarly precarious situations.
Bananas, cocoa and coffee, some of the most important commodities that you guys deal with. What are some of the immediate actions that global trade professionals can implement today that will help promote fair trade standards around the world?
Well, we would say get engaged with the idea of fair trade and the practice and philosophy of fair trade. So if you're an exporter, export fair trade. If you're a retailer, look into the growing market, and it's definitely a growing market, for selling fair trade. And if you're a consumer, of course, buy fair trade.
Thank you very much for three very tangible actions there. You talked about provenance, traceability and ethical practice today. How are digital trade tools helping to promote a more sustainable and fairer global trading environment?
Well, digital's really exciting, and this is where we're very optimistic. The question becomes, once again, access and power. So who has access to data? And it has been, for example, that our producers, in terms of their own products in supply chains, haven't really known where they are. They don't know how much stock has been unsold. That data, that digital data, has tended to be held in the hands of traders and retailers and commercial entities. And so with producers themselves becoming digitally enabled and being able to digitize supply chains with real-time information, there's a whole lot of access and transparency around data now that hasn't existed previously. And I think that's a very exciting development.
And I also think with the addition of emerging technologies like the IoT, Internet of Things, there are so many exciting pieces that could come down the line when it comes to really being able to track a product, so to speak, from farm to fork, right?
Absolutely, and I think that's where consumers are really interested. We're seeing a growing interest in young consumers around sustainability questions, ethical trade, but they want proof, understandably. There's also a cynicism in this space because there are a lot of claims made around sustainable products. So digitalised supply chains with transparent and traceable data offers the proof points that consumers are looking for.
Now, there are lots of issues around standards and standardisation, especially when it comes to certification, of which fair trade certification is held very highly. What can we do to solve some of those challenges that we see today?
Well, I think you've got to look closely at what they offer. We still consider ourselves to be gold standard. We're the most rigorous. We work right across the ESG spectrum. People think we're mostly social, but we also do a good deal of work on climate. We look at issues of deforestation. In fact, we look at a whole range of human rights issues, including child labour, the position of women. So we are the most rigorous. But I think the best endorsees are the producers. So if you ask the producers who they prefer to work with, it's fair trade. We're very proud of that. We work hard to maintain those relationships and that status. So I would say quite unashamedly, go with fair trade because we're the best.
And finally, Lynette, what are the biggest priorities for Fairtrade International for you over the coming months and year?
That's a really big question, and I would say there's three. We're looking obviously at the impacts of climate change. Our producers are on the front line of climate change. They're facing drought, they're facing flooding, they're facing crop failures. So there's a whole lot of implications of the impacts of climate change. But our producers have a whole lot of ideas about what to do about that, whether it's solar photovoltaic energy supplies, whether it's working on soil health, whether it's how you deal with canopy cover, increasing biodiversity on plantations, working with your plantations to simultaneously protect and restore biodiversity that may have been damaged. So that's a huge issue for us. Climate change, as we know, is affecting everyone everywhere. It's particularly true of the world's small producers. Digitalisation, so we've got lots of work to do there at the level of skills and competency, skills,
Yep.
but also access. So we need to see finance flow in partnerships to enable access to the hardware, to enable access to connectivity. So digitalisation is huge for us. And then beyond that, that's all connected to this question of livelihoods. At the centre of our purpose is this notion of the human right to decent livelihoods. And we're lifting our advocacy game on that, including, for example, the European Union's new legislation on human rights and environmental due diligence. So we're watching those kind of developments very closely. So to sum up, climate, digitisation, decent livelihoods.